A CEO whose company had just successfully completed its initial public offering and was steadily profitable, whose specific business model was working measurably better than most industry observers had predicted only a few years earlier, deliberately began quietly investing hundreds of millions of dollars into a specific technology whose entire purpose was to eventually make his own currently profitable business model completely obsolete. His name was Reed Hastings. Born in 1960 in Boston, Massachusetts, he had served in the United States Marine Corps briefly before joining the Peace Corps, where he taught high school mathematics in Swaziland from 1983 to 1985. After returning to the United States, he earned a master's degree in computer science from Stanford University, founded a software company called Pure Software in 1991, and sold that first company in 1997 for a reported price of approximately $700 million. Later that same year, he co-founded Netflix with Mark Randolph, initially built entirely around the specific business model of renting DVDs to customers by mail, delivered through the United States Postal Service in distinctive red envelopes. The original DVD by mail model, while now sometimes remembered as a specifically transitional business idea, was in its own initial period genuinely successful in ways that many established retail and entertainment observers had not initially predicted. Netflix's specific innovation was the combination of an easily browsable online catalog, a subscription-based pricing model that eliminated per-rental late fees, and an efficient distribution operation that reliably delivered DVDs to customers within a small number of business days. The company completed its initial public offering in 2002, and over the following several years grew its subscriber base and revenue at a steadily accelerating rate. Morgan Housel has written that some of the most instructive strategic decisions in modern business involve founders and CEOs who deliberately chose to compete against and eventually replace their own currently profitable business model, before some external competitor with less institutional attachment to the existing revenue stream did the same thing to them from the outside. What makes Reed Hastings' specific 2007 transition worth studying carefully isn't that streaming eventually became the dominant model for video distribution. That outcome now looks obvious in retrospect. It's that when Hastings specifically began significantly investing in streaming infrastructure in 2007, his existing DVD by mail business was still visibly profitable and growing, and the specific decision to actively cannibalize that revenue stream was not obviously wise to a significant number of thoughtful observers at that exact moment. The specific streaming service Netflix launched in January 2007 was, in its initial form, genuinely limited, a small catalog of titles available for online viewing in relatively low video quality, offered as a specific supplemental feature to existing DVD subscribers rather than as a standalone product. Over the following several years, Hastings and his executive team steadily invested in expanding the streaming catalog, upgrading video quality, securing licensing deals with major content owners, and building the specific technical infrastructure required to reliably deliver streaming video at a national and eventually global scale. Benjamin Graham's investment philosophy emphasized carefully distinguishing between activities that were genuinely creating durable long-term economic value and activities that merely appeared profitable in the short term while quietly eroding the underlying long-term value of the business. Hastings' specific 2007 through 2011 strategic decisions can be understood, in explicitly Graham-consistent terms, as a deliberate choice to accept measurably lower reported near-term profit, in the specific form of large ongoing streaming infrastructure investments and licensing costs, in exchange for beginning to build a fundamentally more durable long-term business position, while the underlying DVD by mail business was still generating enough cash flow to fund that specific transition. Daniel Kahneman's research into the specific psychological phenomenon of loss aversion, the measurable tendency of decision makers to weigh potential losses significantly more heavily than equivalent potential gains, helps explain why the specific type of deliberate business model transition Hastings attempted is genuinely difficult, and historically rare, at established public companies. Kahneman's work suggests that senior executives at a currently profitable company face measurably strong psychological pressure to protect existing revenue streams even when doing so is not, in fact, in the company's own actual long-term strategic interest. Hastings' specific decision to actively cannibalize a currently profitable business model, before external competition forced him to, required overcoming exactly that pattern of institutional loss aversion. In September 2011, Hastings made a specific implementation decision that turned out to be genuinely disastrous. He announced that the DVD by mail business would be spun off into a separate subsidiary called Qwikster, with a distinct website and separate billing from the streaming service, alongside a substantial price increase for customers who wanted to keep both services. Customer reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Netflix lost roughly 800,000 subscribers over the following quarter, and the company's stock price declined by roughly 75% from its previous peak in a matter of months. Hastings publicly reversed the Qwikster decision within roughly 3 weeks, and eventually publicly apologized for it in detail. Robert Kiyosaki's core lesson about understanding exactly what actually generates lasting value applies here in a specifically counterintuitive direction. The underlying strategic decision Hastings was attempting to make in 2011, cleanly separating the declining physical DVD business from the growing streaming business, so that each could be operated on the basis of its own distinct economics, was arguably strategically sound in specifically abstract terms. What Hastings underestimated at that specific moment was that what Netflix actually owned, at that specific point in its history, was not just two separate services but a specific integrated subscriber relationship built on a specific combined value proposition. Kiyosaki's framework emphasizes carefully understanding what you actually own, and Hastings' specific 2011 mistake was that he treated Netflix as owning two operationally separable products when what it in fact owned was one integrated subscriber trust relationship that a sudden restructuring could measurably damage. Here's an honest complication worth including, since Netflix's eventual streaming dominance is now sometimes retold as though it were a smoothly executed, obviously wise strategic transition. It was not. The Qwikster decision of 2011 was, by Hastings' own subsequent public admission, a genuinely serious strategic execution mistake that came close to permanently damaging the company. Multiple experienced business analysts and investors during 2011 and 2012 publicly questioned whether Hastings should remain CEO at all, and the specific eventual recovery of the company, including the specifically successful 2013 launch of Netflix Originals content, beginning with House of Cards, was in real time significantly less certain than it now appears in retrospect. The eventually favorable outcome should not obscure the fact that the transition itself was, at multiple specific moments, genuinely close to failing badly. George S. Clason's advice about patient, disciplined long-term wealth building applies here in a specifically corporate strategic direction. Hastings' overall willingness to accept measurably lower near-term reported profits for roughly 5 years, in exchange for building a fundamentally more durable long-term business position, is structurally consistent with Clason's core philosophy of patient reinvestment. But Clason's philosophy also emphasizes maintaining specific structural discipline during that patient reinvestment period, and the Qwikster episode specifically illustrates what happens when the strategic direction is broadly correct but the specific execution decisions along the way are rushed or poorly communicated. This isn't a simple story about a visionary CEO always correctly cannibalizing his own business at exactly the right moment. Hastings got the broad strategic direction genuinely right and the specific execution of one crucial transition step genuinely wrong, and both of those things are separately true. What makes Reed Hastings' specific story worth carefully remembering is the underlying structural insight it illustrates, that deliberately competing against your own currently profitable business model, before an external competitor does, is often strategically correct in principle, but the specific execution details of how the transition is actually managed at the customer relationship level can either quietly succeed or catastrophically fail in ways that are genuinely difficult to predict in advance. So here's a question worth sitting with. In your own financial life or business, are you willing to deliberately accept measurably lower near-term returns in order to protect a fundamentally more durable long-term position? And if so, do you have a specific plan for how you would actually execute that transition without accidentally damaging the specific customer, employer, or personal relationships you depend on along the way. Before you leave, I want to hear from you. Have you ever watched a company or leader you personally admired attempt a genuinely correct long-term strategic transition, and then watched them nearly ruin it through a specific execution mistake? And did that specific mistake permanently change how you evaluate their overall judgment? Read a few comments before you go. Some of the most careful reflections on this channel come from people who've thought hard about the difference between strategic vision and specific execution discipline. Next week, I'll pick one comment and send its author one of the books that inspired this channel. And if these stories help you think differently about money, you'll find a way to support future research in the description. Every contribution helps buy books, access research, and keep this content free for everyone. Remember this. Reed Hastings didn't build Netflix into a dominant global streaming company by being unusually good at protecting his existing profitable business model. He built it by deliberately investing hundreds of millions of dollars into a specific technology whose entire purpose was to eventually make that existing profitable business model obsolete, and by narrowly surviving one specific execution mistake along the way that came genuinely close to undoing the whole strategy.